Hey guys, tonight we're setting out on a journey into the forests of Oregon, where something unusual waits for you in the highlands of the Cascade Range. Imagine walking through pine-scented air, the ground damp from the morning mist, the silence broken only by the crunch of needles beneath your boots. You follow a path that hikers before you have described as peaceful, ordinary, almost uneventful, until it isn't. Because at the end of this trail lies a lake that doesn't follow the rules. A lake that fills up each winter and spring with crystal water from melting snow, and then, as if some invisible hand pulls a plug, drains away until nothing is left but a dry basin. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is right now for you. Now, let's get on with tonight's journey. You arrive at what locals simply call Lost Lake. Even the name sounds like a warning. It rests quietly in the Willamette National Forest, surrounded by towering Douglas firs and ancient volcanic rock. At first glance, the lake looks like any other alpine pool. The surface is calm, reflecting the swaying trees, the lazy drift of clouds. If you had never heard its story, you might set up your tent by the shore and think nothing more of it. But tonight, you know the truth. The Lost Lake of Oregon is not stable. Each year, as winter snow feeds the basin, the waters rise. For a time, it appears eternal, mirroring the sky and inviting fishers and campers. But when summer comes, the water begins to recede. First, a few inches vanish. Then whole stretches of shoreline are left exposed. By late summer, the lake is gone, completely gone, leaving behind cracked mud, tangled roots, and a shallow depression wide enough to swallow a village. And nobody can quite explain where it goes. You kneel by the shore. The mud is soft, the smell earthy, and you can hear a faint gurgle, almost like water swirling down a drain somewhere nearby. That sound grows louder when you walk toward the center. There, in the middle of the empty basin, lie dark holes in the ground, natural drains, or perhaps portals to something more. Locals have their theories. Hikers lean over and swear they can hear echoes deep below like distant underground rivers rushing through tunnels. Some claim they've seen strange lights hovering when the lake drains, as though the earth itself is giving off sparks. What makes this place even stranger is its rhythm. Year after year, the cycle repeats. Water comes, water vanishes, like a magician's trick rehearsed for centuries. Unlike other lakes that shrink due to drought, evaporation, or human interference, Lost Lake follows its own schedule, indifferent to weather forecasts or human science. You walk around the rim, the pine trees creaking overhead. Imagine being the first settlers to stumble upon this phenomenon, watching a seemingly normal lake empty itself like a giant bathtub. How could you not think it was cursed, or blessed, or both? The native tribes who roamed these lands certainly told stories, tales of spirits who claimed the waters each summer, of gods who swallowed rivers when they grew angry, of sacred portals to the underworld disguised as simple holes. As night begins to fall, the forest around you feels heavier. The air cools, and a faint mist rises from the ground. You notice that the silence here is not ordinary. There are no frogs croaking, no crickets singing, only the occasional sigh of the wind. It's almost as if the forest itself holds its breath when the lake disappears, waiting for something unseen to rise from the depths. Lost Lake has been photographed, studied, and mapped. Scientists say lava tubes, giant tunnels formed by ancient volcanic eruptions, lie beneath the basin. When snowmelt fills the lake, water slowly drains through these tubes into underground aquifers. Logical enough. Yet when divers have tried to explore, the holes are too dangerous, the currents too strong, and the darkness too complete. So the truth remains hidden, and every unsolved truth leaves space for imagination. Tonight, as you stand on the edge of the vanishing waters, you can't help but wonder, what lies below those gaping drains? Do the tunnels stretch for miles under Oregon, connecting to unknown caverns? Could there be an underground river system large enough to swallow an entire lake? Or is it something else? something no scientific explanation has yet touched. The stars begin to flicker overhead, piercing the darkness. The outline of the Cascade Mountains looms in the distance, silent guardians of this secret. And as you breathe in the pine-scented air, you realize you are standing in front of one of nature's most persistent riddles. This is where our story begins. With a lake that does not obey the rules of lakes, a body of water that vanishes each year like a ghost, leaving behind more questions than answers. In the chapters ahead, we will follow the whispers of old legends, the investigations of scientists, the testimonies of campers, and the eerie experiences of those who claim to have seen more than just water slipping underground. For now, you zip up your jacket, take one last look at the still surface, and listen. That faint gurgle beneath the earth. It sounds almost like a voice, waiting for you to follow. You return to Lost Lake on another day, this time in early spring. The air is cool, the kind that makes your breath visible in faint clouds. Snow still lingers in shaded corners of the forest, but the sun has begun its steady work of melting it down, sending trickles of icy water rushing toward the basin. This is when Lost Lake reveals one of its most magical faces, when the basin is nearly full, the water shimmering like a sheet of glass. Reflecting the sky so perfectly, you can almost lose track of where the world ends and where the lake begins. You approach the shoreline, your boots sinking slightly into the damp ground. The water laps gently at the edges, small ripples carrying the reflection of towering Douglas firs back to you. If you didn't know better, you might think this lake was eternal. Families bring canoes here, sliding across the surface, laughing as they cast fishing lines into the calm water. Campers pitch tents along the perimeter, roasting marshmallows as the sun dips below the tree line. It feels normal, almost idyllic. And yet, the locals you pass on the trail smile knowingly. They nod as if to say, enjoy it while you can. It won't last long. There's an unspoken understanding among those who live near Lost Lake. This beauty is temporary. The water will vanish and the cycle will begin again. You linger at the edge, trying to memorize the scene. The sparkle of sunlight on ripples, the hush of the wind through the trees, the occasional call of a bird. Because soon, very soon, the view will change. In just a few weeks, the same ground you're standing on will stretch far into the basin, cracked and dry, with strange holes yawning where the water now hides them. Hikers who come often say there's something unsettling about witnessing the transformation. One day, you're fishing from a canoe. The next, you're staring at an empty crater. It challenges your sense of permanence, the way you expect the world to behave. Lakes shouldn't vanish. Rivers shouldn't disappear into the earth without explanation. But here, that is the rule. You decide to circle the shoreline, following a narrow path that hugs the water's edge. The trees lean over, casting long shadows on the surface. At certain spots you pause, noticing how the water near the center moves differently, almost as if pulled downward. It's faint, subtle, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. This is the first glimpse of the vanishing act, tiny eddies forming above the hidden drainage holes. They're not violent whirlpools, nothing so dramatic, just the slightest suggestion of motion, like the surface is breathing. You crouch, watching, and realize that the water here is never truly still. Later, when you return in midsummer, the transformation is complete. The once vibrant lake is gone. The basin stretches wide, its floor littered with tree stumps, rocks, and cracked soil. Where fishermen once cast their lines, only dust swirls in the wind. The sound of lapping waves has been replaced by silence. You walk into the center, where the mysterious holes gape open. They're about the size of car tires, jagged at the edges, dark enough that your flashlight beam seems to vanish inside them. Water drips faintly down the sides, even in the dry season, as if the earth is slowly sipping whatever is left. Some locals joke that it's Oregon's biggest drain. Others don't joke at all. Standing here, you feel the difference in atmosphere. When the lake is full, the forest hums with life. Birds, insects, the rustle of animals in the underbrush. But when the basin dries, the soundscape dies with it. It's as though nature itself takes a step back, wary of whatever lies below. A camper you meet tells you about their first time witnessing the transformation. "It was eerie," they say, their voice low. "We went to sleep by a full lake, and when we came back a month later, the water was gone. Just gone. Like someone drained it overnight." They shake their head, eyes distant. You don't forget something like that. And you don't, because the shift is too dramatic, too absolute. Other lakes shrink in summer, but not like this. Lost Lake doesn't merely shrink, it disappears, leaving only questions behind. The most fascinating part is how routine it is. This isn't a one-time event. It happens every year, the same cycle, as dependable as the seasons themselves. Winter snowmelt fills the basin, spring sustains it, summer drains it. By autumn, it's an empty bowl. Then the snow comes again, and the cycle restarts. Lost Lake lives, dies, and is reborn, year after year, without fail. Some visitors find it comforting, like a natural rhythm, proof that nature has its own heartbeat. Others find it deeply unsettling. What kind of place swallows its own waters whole? What secrets lie beneath the surface? Scientists, of course, have their theories. They'll tell you about volcanic rock, about ancient lava flows carving tunnels through the earth. They'll explain how water follows gravity, slipping through porous stone, vanishing into aquifers. But even the experts admit they can't map the tunnels fully. Nobody knows how far they stretch, or where the water finally emerges. It could be miles away, bubbling up in some hidden spring, or perhaps joining an underground river that flows unseen beneath Oregon's forests. For the average visitor, though, those explanations don't erase the strangeness. They don't soften the eerie feeling of standing in a basin that should hold a lake but doesn't. Science may give reasons, but the mystery remains. You imagine being one of the first explorers to stumble upon this place, unaware of its cycle. You might camp by the lake, enjoy its beauty, and leave thinking nothing of it. Then someone else arrives weeks later and finds only dust. How long before rumors of witchcraft, curses, or portals began to spread? Even now, with all our technology, Lost Lake refuses to give up its full story. It is a reminder that nature is not fully tamed, that some corners of the world keep their secrets no matter how many scientists, hikers, or storytellers come looking. And so, as you stand at the center of the empty basin, peering into those dark drainage holes, you realize you are staring at a doorway. Not a doorway in the human sense, with hinges and locks, but a natural doorway into the unknown. And the unknown always whispers louder than any explanation. The water will return, as it always does. The cycle will continue. And you, along with countless others, will keep coming back, drawn by the mystery of a lake that lives and dies with the seasons. Because once you've seen it, once you've heard the silence of the empty basin and the faint gurgle of hidden depths, you can't help but wonder, what else is out there, waiting to be discovered? You wander deeper into the story of Lost Lake, not with your boots this time, but with your imagination, reaching back centuries, to a time before Oregon was dotted with highways and campgrounds. Long before scientists came with notebooks and instruments, long before families came with canoes and cameras, this lake was already a place of wonder and of whispers. The people who lived closest to these forests, the native tribes of Oregon, carried stories about places like this. You hear it in the way their descendants speak today, careful, respectful, as though the land itself has ears. They didn't see lakes, rivers, and mountains as separate pieces of scenery. They saw them as alive, beings with moods, with memories, with wills of their own. Imagine sitting by a fire in the shadow of Mount Hood generations ago. The flames crackle, sparks drifting into the night sky. Around you, elders speak in low voices, telling the children about the lake that fills and empties. No written maps, no official names, just stories carried on the breath of those who lived here first. They say the land remembers. They say water moves where it wishes, sometimes hiding, sometimes revealing itself, depending on what the spirits of the earth demand. One story you hear is about balance. In this version, Lost Lake is a vessel, a kind of offering bowl. When the snows melt, the bowl fills, as though the mountains are giving thanks to the valley. But when the sun returns, the water drains away, carrying the offerings back underground, feeding unseen rivers that sustain the forest. It is a cycle of giving and taking, a reminder that nothing in nature belongs to you, it belongs to itself. Another tale speaks of punishment. The story goes that long ago, a proud warrior ignored warnings and defied the spirits of the mountain. He took too much from the land, hunted more than he needed, cut down trees without asking permission. To teach him humility, the earth opened up beneath him, swallowing not just him but the waters he cherished. Ever since, the lake refuses to stay, draining away each year as a warning that greed has consequences. Of course, when you listen to these stories today, you might smile, thinking of folklore as colorful but fanciful. But then you stand again at the edge of the empty basin, staring into those dark, yawning holes. And suddenly the idea of the earth punishing arrogance doesn't sound so far-fetched. Some tribes spoke of hidden passageways beneath the ground, great tunnels carved by fire and gods. The holes at the bottom of the lake were said to be entrances to these passages, leading into realms humans were not meant to enter. Those who wandered too close, they warned, might hear voices echoing from the depths. Some might be tempted to climb down, but those who did were never seen again. The earth takes them, the elders said, because curiosity without respect is dangerous. You think of this the next time you shine a flashlight into one of the holes. The beam cuts only a short distance before the darkness swallows it whole. What could be down there? Caverns? Endless stone channels? Or something stranger? Something that doesn't fit on any scientific map? Locals sometimes laugh about the legends, but others admit they've felt something unexplainable. A woman you meet at a nearby diner leans closer when she talks about the lake. When it's dry, she says softly, you can feel it watching you, like the ground knows you're there. She pauses, stirring her coffee. My grandfather used to say it was alive, and you know what? I believe him. It's easy to dismiss folklore when you're far from the forest, sitting in a well-lit room, scrolling through your phone. But out there, in the hush of the basin, with nothing but the whisper of wind in the trees, those old stories slip back into your mind. You picture the bowl of offerings, the greedy warrior swallowed whole, the forbidden tunnels. The myths blend with the silence until you can tell which is more real, the geology or the ghosts. What strikes you most is how universal these stories feel. Across the world, cultures have legends about water that comes and goes, about places that refuse to behave according to human rules. In some stories, lakes are portals. In others, they are mirrors to another world. Here in Oregon, Lost Lake holds that same kind of gravity. It is not just a body of water, it is a character, playing its role in an older, larger tale. You think about the children who grew up with these stories. How many of them, standing at the edge of the lake as it drained away, wondered if they were looking at the very spot where the warrior was swallowed? How many listened to the wind and thought they heard voices from the tunnels? For them, this wasn't entertainment. It was a way to understand the land, to make peace with a mystery too large to ignore. Even today you can feel the echo of that mindset. Modern hikers post photos online, marveling at how the lake disappears each summer. But look closer at the comments, and you'll see hints of something deeper. People saying the place feels eerie, that it doesn't seem right, that they sense something they can't explain. Maybe that's just the echo of folklore, still alive in the soil. As you sit at the lake's edge, listening, you realize the mystery is not only about where the water goes. It's also about how people respond to it. Some shrug and walk away. Some pull out measuring tools and test samples. And some, like the tribes before, weave the strangeness into stories that survive for centuries. And maybe that's what Lost Lake truly is. Not just a hole in the ground, but a canvas for human imagination. A reminder that even in a world mapped by satellites, there are still places that tug at the edges of your understanding. Places that make you ask questions you can't quite answer. The fire burns low in your mind's eye. The elders' voices fade. You were left once again with the sound of the forest and the image of dark water draining into unseen depths. The legends may be ancient, but they are not gone. They live every time someone stands here, staring into the basin, and wonders what secrets lie beneath the soil of Oregon. You shift now from the whispers of myth to the steady hum of science. Because while legends might satisfy the soul, you know the mind wants more solid ground to stand on. You stand at Lost Lake's edge again, watching the water creep toward those holes, and you ask yourself, what's really going on down there? Scientists have spent years chasing that question, and though their language is colder, their explanations are no less fascinating. They talk about geology, about the skin and bones of the earth itself. To understand Lost Lake, they say, you need to think about what lies beneath your feet, not just what sparkles on the surface. This region of Oregon is volcanic country. You're walking on land built from fire, molded by eruptions that spat lava across valleys and carved mountains with ash and stone. Over time, lava doesn't just burn and harden. It also leaves behind gaps, tubes, and tunnels. Imagine a river of molten rock cooling from the outside in. The crust hardens, but inside, the liquid still flows, leaving behind hollow tubes once the fire drains away. Sometimes those tubes collapse. Sometimes they stay hidden for centuries, like secret passageways beneath the forest. Geologists think Lost Lake sits on such a landscape. The holes at the bottom of the basin aren't random. They're likely collapsed lava tubes, openings to an underground network carved long before you were born, long before anyone ever called this place Oregon. In the spring, when snowmelt rushes down from Mount Hood, the lake fills, as though the mountain is pouring water into a cup. But that cup has cracks, and slowly, inevitably, the water drains away into those volcanic veins. You kneel at the edge, remembering the way the ground swallowed your flashlight beam. Now, instead of folklore, you picture water trickling down those tubes, dripping into unseen caverns, maybe feeding underground aquifers. Some of that water might re-emerge miles away, in a creek or a spring. Scientists say the earth is like a sponge here, porous, shifting, always thirsty. But even as the scientific story unfolds, new questions bloom. Where exactly does the water go? Researchers have tried dye tests, dropping harmless colored liquids into the basin and searching downstream for signs of it. Sometimes they find hints, but often the results vanish into the complexity of the underground. The truth is, the plumbing of the earth here is still a mystery. You might know the general idea, lava tubes, aquifers, porous rock. But the precise map, that remains hidden, and that's what keeps the curiosity alive. Science explains much, but it rarely erases wonder. Instead, it opens new layers of questions. For example, why here, in this one basin, does the process play out so dramatically? Other lakes sit atop volcanic rock, but they don't drain away completely. Lost Lake seems almost eager to disappear, as if it has made an agreement with the mountain. Another puzzle, what keeps the holes from clogging up entirely? You'd think that with each passing year, fallen leaves, branches, and silt would block them, and yet, year after year, the drains remain open, swallowing water as efficiently as ever. Some locals half-joke that someone or something down there must be cleaning them out. Scientists suggest it could be the pressure of flowing water, constantly flushing debris deeper underground. But no one has climbed far enough inside to know for sure. You picture yourself crawling into one of those openings with a helmet and a headlamp. The walls would be damp, black basalt curving around you, your footsteps echoing. The air would smell of earth, cool and still. But before you get too far, the tunnel would tighten, shrinking until you couldn't move forward. You'd be left in the dark, listening to the faint gurgle of water traveling somewhere you'll never reach. It's the kind of thought that makes you shiver. Standing again at the shore, you remember how scientists balance between facts and humility. They can measure rock samples, map flows of ancient lava, and estimate where water might travel. But they can't pin down every hidden chamber, every passage. The underground is too complex, too layered, too vast. Even in a world where satellites photograph the surface from space, the secret heart of the Earth still keeps itself concealed. What's remarkable is how science doesn't kill the mystery, it amplifies it. Because when you hear lava tubes or aquifers, you realize you are standing on a landscape shaped by forces beyond imagination. Rivers of fire that cooled into stone mountains that rose from chaos, water-carving paths where no human eye has ever looked. To call it geology is one thing, to feel it beneath your boots is another. Some researchers even say the lake is a living reminder of the region's violent past. Each year, when it empties, it's as if the land itself is whispering. Remember what made me. Remember the fire and the floods. Remember that nature is never static. It shifts, it drains, it renews. You think of how you'd explain this to a child, watching the lake drain for the first time. You'd want to tell them about lava and porous basalt, about aquifers and underground rivers. But you'd also want to leave space for awe, for that simple, pure feeling of watching a lake vanish and realizing the world still holds secrets bigger than you. Even scientists admit they don't have every answer. When asked how long the cycle has been happening, they shrug. Thousands of years, maybe tens of thousands. When asked if the lake will always drain, they hesitate. What if one day the tubes clog completely? Would Lost Lake stay full, transforming into a permanent body of water? Or would it always find a way to empty, no matter what? That uncertainty is part of the magic. Science explains enough to ground you, to show you that the Earth has its reasons. But it also leaves gaps, spaces where imagination and legend creep back in. You're left straddling both worlds, the measured certainty of geology and the whispered possibilities of myth. So you step back from the basin, the holes still drinking in silence. You understand more now than when you arrived, yet somehow, knowing the words lava tube doesn't make the scene any less strange. If anything, it makes it richer. Because now, when you watch the water vanish, you see both the myth of the greedy warrior and the reality of molten rivers long cooled into stone. Both truths flow together, filling you with wonder. The story of Lost Lake isn't about choosing between science and legend. It's about standing here, on this quiet patch of earth in Oregon, and realizing that both are part of the same mystery. You linger by the basin long enough to realize that not all mysteries here come from rocks and water. Sometimes the people who wander through Lost Lake carry stories with them, stories that cling to the place like mist. These tales don't talk about basalt or aquifers. They whisper about sights and sounds that science doesn't catalog. And once you start hearing them, you can't unhear them. Campers who spend nights near Lost Lake speak of strange lights. Picture yourself lying in a tent, the wind brushing pine needles overhead, when you notice a glow through the fabric. At first you think it's the moon, but when you unzip the flap, you see something else. Spheres of light hovering above the empty basin, shifting, floating, then fading. Some call them will-o'-the-wisps, ghost lights that lead travelers astray. Others think they're reflections, maybe headlights bouncing oddly across the forest. But when you're there, standing in that silence, you can't explain why your heart races. Hikers tell of voices too. Soft murmurs in the trees, especially at dusk, when the shadows lengthen and the air cools. They say it feels like someone is just out of sight, following, breathing, waiting. You glance over your shoulder, and of course, there's nothing. Still, the sense of being watched refuses to leave. It's enough to make even the bravest wanderer pack up before nightfall. Then there are the animals. Locals note how deer avoid the basin once it begins to drain, as if sensing something unnatural. Birds fly overhead, but rarely land near the holes. Dogs, usually eager to splash in water, freeze at the shoreline, whining and tugging away. You can explain away one or two coincidences, but when creature after creature acts the same, you start to wonder, what do they know that you don't? Legends flourish in this fertile soil of unease. One story tells of a trapper who camped by the lake in the late 1800s. He was searching for beaver, but instead, he found only silence. His journal, discovered years later, described hearing drums at night, steady, rhythmic, echoing through the trees though no one else was nearby. He wrote of water that seemed to whisper his name, and of dreams so vivid he woke gasping, sure he was drowning. Then suddenly his entries stop. No body was ever found. Some claim he fell into the holes. Others believe the forest took him, adding him to its collection. Another tale comes from the 1920s, when a pair of brothers supposedly tried to block the drainage holes. They wanted to keep the lake full year-round, turning it into a resort for fishing and boating. They hauled stones, logs, even metal scraps, stuffing them into the openings. For a while the water rose, and they congratulated themselves. But one morning, campers found their equipment abandoned, their tent shredded, and the holes flowing freely again. The brothers were gone. Whether they simply left in failure or vanished more mysteriously, no one knows. Even today, whispers persist. Fishermen claim their lines sometimes snag on something that pulls back, not with the fight of a fish, but with a deliberate tug, as though something below is holding the hook. A few swear they've seen shapes moving beneath the surface when the water is low, dark figures that ripple away before you can focus. Skeptics laugh, saying it's shadows from the trees or currents swirling in the basin. But those who've seen it insist the memory never leaves. Superstition takes many forms here. Some believe the lake is guarded by spirits, punishing those who try to interfere with its natural cycle. Others see it as a portal, a gateway between worlds, where the boundaries of earth and sky grow thin. You can dismiss those ideas as folklore, yet as you stand in the chill air, you realize how easy it is to believe. The forest feels older than your rational thoughts, older than the tidy explanations of textbooks. Even technology bends under the weight of strangeness. Photographers complain that their cameras sometimes malfunction, batteries draining faster than expected, images blurring even in still conditions. Hikers with GPS units say signals cut out near the basin, as if the satellites look away for a moment. Again, there are logical reasons. Cold drains batteries, thick trees block signals. And yet, when you're the one holding the device, staring at a map that suddenly shows you nowhere, the rational answer feels thinner than the mist on the water. The most enduring superstition is one you have already heard in pieces, that the holes themselves are alive. Locals half-jokingly call them thirsty mouths, saying they drink more than water. Some parents warn children not to play near them, whispering that the earth might pull them in if they lean too close. You tell yourself that's just a cautionary tale, but as you recall how your flashlight beam vanished into the dark, you admit the image isn't easy to shake. What makes these stories so powerful isn't it whether they read true, it as how they change the way you see the lake. After hearing them, you no longer stand on the shore thinking only of geology. Now, every ripple feels like a message, every rustle in the trees like a presence. Science might map lava tubes, but superstition maps the human heart, with all its fears and imaginings. And perhaps that's why Lost Lake endures in memory long after you leave. Not because you understand it, but because you don't. It's one of those places where logic and legend walk side by side, where you're never quite sure which trail you're following. You zip your jacket against the evening chill, realizing how easily these stories take root. You're not someone who usually believes in ghosts, but tonight, you can't shake the feeling that the forest is listening, watching, waiting. And when you finally step away, you don't look back. Because some part of you thinks, what if the lake is looking back too? You've spent days circling the surface, walking the shoreline, listening to both scientists and storytellers. But to really grasp Lost Lake's mystery, you feel yourself pulled downward, into the places no one has seen. You kneel again at the largest opening, staring into that gaping throat in the ground. And in your mind's eye, you climb down. The rocks are sharp beneath your palms, slick with moisture. The smell changes first. Above ground you breathe the resin of pine trees and damp earth. But down here the scent sharpens to stone and minerals, almost metallic. The light dims quickly, swallowed by basalt walls, and the sounds of the forest fade. In their place comes a drip, 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 steady and echoing, water falling somewhere deeper. You imagine the tunnels stretching like veins beneath the mountain. Lava tubes formed long ago, when molten rivers carved channels through soft rock. When the lava drained, hollows remained, some large enough for a person to crawl through, others vast as cathedrals. You picture standing in one of those chambers, your flashlight beam barely reaching the ceiling, black rock arching above like a frozen wave. Geologists believe Lost Lake drains into this network. Water trickles and gushes depending on the season, finding its way through cracks, racing along hidden slopes. In spring, when the snow melts, the tunnels roar with rushing water. In late summer they quiet to a whisper, just enough to keep the basin dry. You imagine the sound of it, the living heartbeat of the earth, pulsing through stone arteries. Yet what strikes you most is the thought of how much remains unseen. No one has fully mapped these tubes beneath Lost Lake. It's too dangerous, too unstable. The entrances are narrow, the rock brittle. One wrong step and a wall could collapse. Even advanced caving teams hesitate to push far, knowing the mountain doesn't forgive mistakes. That's why so much of what lies below remains in shadows, a world no light has touched. You picture explorers in the past, miners, surveyors, maybe curious locals, dropping ropes, lanterns swinging as they lowered themselves down. Some might have returned with stories of endless tunnels, others with silence, their voices swallowed forever. You don't know if those stories are real, but they fit the feeling that the underworld here isn't meant for humans. It's easy to see how myths grew from this. Indigenous tales spoke of sacred places where the earth breathed and drank. They described caverns as gateways, not just holes. And as you crouch in your imagined tunnel, hearing the drip of unseen water, you realize how natural that belief feels. The underground doesn't reveal itself. It waits, and in waiting, it demands respect. What fascinates scientists is not only the drainage, but what might happen to the water once it's down there. Does it pool in underground lakes, sealed in darkness for centuries? Does it travel miles before surfacing again in a creek or spring? Some theories even suggest it seeps into aquifers that connect to entirely different watersheds, meaning the water from Lost Lake could reappear in rivers far from where it began. Imagine drinking from a spring miles away, never knowing your cup once held water from a vanished lake. And still, mysteries remain. Why do the holes never close entirely? Why does debris not choke the pathways? Why does the lake seem perfectly balanced between filling and draining, as if guided by an unseen hand? Geology gives frameworks, but not final answers. Beneath the surface, you're left with more questions than when you started. In your mind, you switch off the flashlight. Darkness wraps around you like velvet. The dripping continues, steady and eternal. You take a deep breath, realizing you're standing inside the secret engine that makes Lost Lake vanish and return. You feel awe, but also unease, because part of you senses the tunnels stretch much farther than you can imagine, maybe deeper than you should dare to follow. And maybe that's why Lost Lake's mystery endures. It isn't just the sight of water vanishing on the surface. It is the knowledge that beneath your feet lies a labyrinth, untouched, unexplored, and perhaps unexplainable. The ground is hollow, the earth breathing, the mountain alive. When you finally climb back to daylight in your imagination, blinking in the sun, you feel the difference. The forest seems brighter, safer, but you know what lurks below. You know the holes aren't just drains, they're doorways, and once you've peered inside, the image never leaves. You return to the surface with a new awareness of what lies beneath, but the strangest stories about Lost Lake don't come from scientists. They come from ordinary travelers, campers, fishermen, hikers, who arrive expecting quiet nights by the water and leave with stories that sound more like folklore than fact. Imagine this. You've set up camp on the northern edge of the basin. The sun has just dipped behind the trees, and the lake is still half full, a mirror catching the last streaks of orange. You roast something simple over the fire, the smoke curling into the cool night air. Everything feels calm until the silence changes. You don't notice it at first, but then you realize no crickets, no frogs, no nightbirds, just a blanket of quiet that presses on your ears. You poke at the fire, and in that moment of awareness, you swear you hear something moving just beyond the tree line. Not a deer, not a bear. Too soft, too deliberate. Footsteps. Campers tell this story in different ways. Some say they've seen shapes moving in the dark, too tall to be animals, too quiet to be people. Others describe voices, as if conversations float through the trees, low and indistinct, stopping the moment you lean closer. A few admit they packed up before dawn, unwilling to spend another night. One fisherman's tale, passed around like a campfire ghost story, describes pulling his line through the water only to feel it snag. He tugged, thinking it had caught on a submerged branch. But then the line pulled back, not sharply, like a fish, but slowly, insistently, as though someone on the other end was testing him. He yanked harder. The line snapped, and when he reeled it in, he found the end frayed, not cut clean, as though something below had shredded it. He never fished there again. Hikers, too, share odd experiences. Some claim that when the lake is low, they've seen figures down in the basin where the water should be. They describe men in old-fashioned clothes, standing ankle-deep in the mud, gazing silently at the holes as if waiting for something to rise. Others swear they've glimpsed lights, tiny, floating orbs drifting across the empty ground before vanishing. Skeptics chalk it up to reflections, swamp gas, tricks of the eye. But when enough stories stack together, the line between imagination and reality blurs. One of the most unsettling stories comes from a pair of travelers in the 1970s. They camped by the lake for a weekend, hoping for solitude. On their second night, they heard knocking, 3 sharp raps, echoing across the basin. Thinking it was another group of campers, they called out, but no one answered. The knocks repeated, closer this time. They searched the shoreline with flashlights, finding nothing. At dawn, they discovered fresh footprints circling their tent. The strange part. The prints led into the drained basin and stopped at one of the holes, as if whoever left them had stepped into the earth itself. Stories like these don't appear in scientific journals. They live in whispers, traded between people who've been here and those curious enough to ask. For every tale dismissed as exaggeration, another lingers that feels too vivid, too specific to ignore. And even if you don't believe, you catch yourself looking over your shoulder when the woods grow quiet. Superstition feeds on these accounts. Locals sometimes warn newcomers not to camp too close to the holes, not because of danger you can measure, but because of something older, an instinct that says some places don't want company. One elder once remarked that the lake has its own personality. It gives, it takes, and it doesn't like being watched. You wonder if maybe these experiences are born from the environment itself. The isolation, the silence, the strange draining cycle, it primes the mind to expect something more. Human imagination has always been a mirror, reflecting back the strangeness of the world. Maybe Lost Lake doesn't need to hold ghosts or spirits. Maybe the real haunting is what your mind creates when faced with something that defies normal explanation. Still, when you hear campers swear they've seen shadows without sources, when you hear fishermen talk about something tugging from below, when you picture footprints leading into holes that drink whole lakes, you find yourself less certain. Because sometimes stories don't just survive. They repeat, told again and again, each one echoing the same eerie refrain. Lost Lake is not just water and rock. It is alive in ways we don't yet understand. As the fire dies down and you settle deeper into your sleeping bag, You wonder what you'd hear if you dared to stay the night. And you realize that even if you didn't hear or see anything, the waiting itself would change you. Because here, silence is never just silence. You sit near the drained basin, watching the last streaks of orange fade from the Oregon sky, when you remember something you read before coming here. The stories of the native tribes who lived in this land, long before settlers named it Lost Lake. For them, it was never just another patch of water in the Cascades. It was a place of significance, a place they approached with reverence and, sometimes, fear. The Klamath and Warm Springs tribes told stories of underground rivers that carried spirits between worlds. According to one tale, the holes at Lost Lake were more than drains. They were mouths, gateways where the earth swallowed water not to destroy it, but to carry it someplace sacred. When you hear that version, the seasonal vanishing act isn't just geology. It's ritual. The earth drinks, then releases, like an endless cycle of offering and return. Elders passed down warnings, too. Some spoke of shape-shifting spirits, guardians of the lake who punished anyone who treated it carelessly. The spirits were said to appear as birds or deer, leading travelers astray until they found themselves lost in the forest. That might explain the many stories of hikers wandering the nearby trails, disoriented despite maps and compasses. Perhaps it wasn't clumsy navigation. Perhaps it was the lake reminding people of its power. Another legend tells of a great serpent, said to dwell beneath the basalt floor. This creature, coiled in the darkness of the lava tubes, stirred whenever water vanished into its domain. When people heard the moaning wind through the holes, elders said it was the serpent sighing, restless in its subterranean prison. Some believed earthquakes in the region were tied to its movements, the earth itself trembling when the serpent shifted in sleep. But not all stories carried fear. Some spoke of Lost Lake as a place of vision quests. Young people would come here, fasting and waiting in silence, hoping the mystery of the disappearing waters would reveal truths about their future. To them, the vanishing lake was a teacher, reminding humans that nothing is permanent, that everything flows and changes. The water was not gone. It was simply elsewhere, waiting for the right season to return. When settlers arrived, they mostly ignored these stories. To them, the basin was just another feature of the wild frontier, useful for fishing or camping. But every now and then, even settlers found themselves repeating native warnings. Farmers nearby noticed crops growing strangely in soil watered with lake runoff, sprouting tall but brittle stalks. Hunters claimed their prey behaved differently near the lake, eyes wide and wary. And so, whispers of curses mingled with native legends, weaving together into a tapestry of unease. What strikes you most about these tribal accounts is how they explain the unexplainable without ever demanding a neat solution. To say a serpent lives beneath the lake is, in a way, no less believable than to say lava tubes swallow the water. To say spirits guard the basin is no less logical than to say air pressure creates the moaning sound. Both views carry weight, because both honor the mystery. As you imagine the tribe sitting around fires, telling these tales under starlight, you realize the continuity of curiosity. Hundreds of years ago, people stood in the same basin, staring at the same vanishing water, and asked the same questions you're asking now. Why does it disappear? Where does it go? What does it mean? Their answers came wrapped in myth and story, but they serve the same purpose, to bridge the gap between what is seen and what is not. One legend in particular lingers with you. It speaks of a man who followed the water underground, slipping into the lava tubes to discover where it went. He was never seen again, though some say his voice can be heard on still nights, calling faintly from beneath the earth. The story doesn't explain how he survived or why he ventured down. It simply leaves you with the image of a soul swallowed by mystery, still reaching back through whispers. And maybe that's the real lesson here. The tribes never pretended to control the lake, never tried to force an answer. Instead, they lived alongside the mystery, shaping stories to carry the weight of the unknown. In doing so, they left us something more enduring than explanation. They left us wonder. You glance again at the darkened basin. Somewhere deep below, the water moves silently through unseen passages. And perhaps, if you believe the old stories, something else moves with it. Serpent, spirit, or wandering voice. Whatever truth lies beneath, it has endured for centuries, untouchable by science and unbroken by time. And that, you realize, is why Lost Lake remains more than a geological oddity. It is a living legend, carrying the echoes of those who first named it sacred. The night stretches deep over Lost Lake, and you find yourself sitting in silence, staring at the empty basin. It's nothing more than a hollow crater now, dusted with pine needles and cracked earth where water once shimmered. Yet the emptiness itself feels alive, humming with everything you've learned. The science, the folklore, the myths, and the mysteries still unsolved. You replay the pieces in your mind. Geologists explaining lava tubes, engineers measuring flow rates, tribes whispering about spirits and serpents, campers swearing they heard voices echo through the wind. Each version of the story fits in its own way, and yet none of them really complete the puzzle. Instead of clarity, you're left with layers, like rings in the old fir trees surrounding the basin, each one marking a season, each one telling only part of the story. And that's the strange magic of Lost Lake. It refuses to be pinned down. If you treat it like a riddle, it won't yield a single neat answer. But if you treat it like a story, if you let yourself step inside its rhythms, it offers you something else entirely. Wonder, perspective, a reminder that not everything in this world was made for you to solve. Think about it. How many places can you stand today where the world still keeps a secret? In an age where satellites scan every mountain and drones map every river, Lost Lake still manages to slip away. It empties before your eyes, defies prediction, and leaves you standing in its shadow, guessing. That makes it one of the last true mysteries you can walk into. Boots sinking into the soil, ears tuned to the moaning air, eyes tracing the stars that shimmer brighter here than anywhere else. And maybe that's why people keep returning. Scientists come back with their instruments, hikers come back with cameras, storytellers come back with notebooks, each of them searching, in their own way, for something that cannot quite be named. But perhaps the lake doesn't exist to be understood. Perhaps it exists to remind you what mystery feels like, because deep down, you've felt it here. The nervous silence when the animals disappear, the pulse beneath your boots, the shimmer in the night sky that doesn't match any chart, the stories of lost travelers, voices in the earth, guardians in the forest. You can deny it if you want, laugh it off as coincidence, but when the basin swallows another season's worth of water, your certainty will go down with it. So you leave the lake the way so many before you have, not with answers, but with questions that follow you long after the forest closes around you. Questions that make you glance back over your shoulder. Questions that whisper when you close your eyes. Questions that remind you that the world is still wider, deeper, and stranger than you think. And as you walk away under the glow of a cold Oregon moon, you realize something simple. The lake will keep draining, season after season, long after you're gone. Its mystery will outlive every theory, every legend, every attempt at explanation. It belongs to the earth and to itself. But for one quiet night, it also belongs to you. So if you felt even a spark of curiosity tonight, if the mystery of Lost Lake has pulled you in, then take a moment now. Like the video, share it with someone who needs a good story, and subscribe so you can come back for more. Because here, at the edge of the draining lake, the story is never really over.